The snow fell like tiny glass shards across the barren landscape of Hecate Prime. The wind howled with a fury that could strip paint from metal and freeze breath in lungs. In this endless white wasteland, nothing should have been able to survive. Yet something had just fallen from the dark sky above. Lyra's scout pod hit the frozen ground with a sickening crunch. The impact sent shockwaves through her small frame as warning lights flashed red throughout the tiny cockpit. She groaned, tasting something metallic in her mouth. Her head throbbed, and when she tried to move her left arm, sharp pain shot through. Her shoulder. The worst part wasn't the pain, though. It was the silence that followed. Her ship's gentle humming had stopped. The warm air that usually circulated through the cabin was gone. Even the soft blue glow from her control panels had died, leaving her in complete darkness, except for the faint light filtering through the cracked viewport. Lyra pressed her hand against the emergency power switch. Nothing happened. She tried. Again, harder this time. Still nothing. The power core that had carried her across 3 star systems was now as dead as the frozen world around her. Cold air began seeping through the damaged hull. At first it felt refreshing after the recycled atmosphere of space travel. But within minutes, that refreshing coolness became an uncomfortable chill. Within 10 minutes, she started shivering. Her people, the Velthari, came from the warm desert world of Solareth. Their crystalline skin was designed to absorb and hold heat from their twin suns. They could survive in temperatures that would cook most other species. But cold was their weakness. Anything below what humans would call room temperature became dangerous for them. The temperature inside the pod continued dropping. Lyra's breath began forming small clouds in the air. She wrapped her arms around herself, but it did little good. Her thin exploration suit was meant for climate-controlled environments, not Arctic survival. She tried the communication system. Dead. The distress beacon wasn't responding either. Her people wouldn't even know she was missing for another 6 standard hours. When she was supposed to report back from her scouting mission, the cold was getting worse, much worse. Frost began forming on the inside of her viewport. Her fingers were getting numb, making it hard to work the manual controls. When she looked down at her hands, she could see ice crystals starting to form along the edges of her crystalline skin patches. This was how her people died in the cold. First, the extremities would freeze, then the crystalline patches that regulated their body temperature would crack and fail. After that, hypothermia would set in quickly. She had maybe an hour before she lost consciousness. 2 hours before her body would shut down completely. Lyra curled up in the pilot's seat, pulling her knees to her chest. She thought about her home world, about the warm sands and the heat of the twin suns on her face. She thought about her family, who would never know what happened to their youngest daughter. Outside, the storm raged on. The wind threw snow against her damaged pod with increasing violence. In the distance, she could hear strange sounds, like metal groaning under pressure. Whether it was her ship breaking apart further or something else entirely, she couldn't tell. All she knew was that she was alone, trapped, and slowly freezing to death on one of the most hostile worlds in this sector of the galaxy. G1 pushed back from his desk and stretched his arms above his head. The coffee in his mug had gone cold hours ago, but he'd been too focused on the mineral analysis reports to notice. Working alone on Hecate Prime meant that evening routines were the only thing keeping him sane. Check the equipment, review the day's data, make sure the heating systems were running properly, then maybe watch an old movie before bed. He walked over to the main scanner console, the same route he'd taken every night for the past 8 months. The screen showed the usual readings. Seismic activity was normal. The automated mining drones were powered down for the night. Everything looked exactly as it should. Then something caught his eye. There was a small blip on the energy detector, something that definitely hadn't been there during his afternoon check. G1 frowned and tapped the screen. The reading was faint but consistent. It wasn't coming from any of his equipment. He pulled up the location data. The signal was coming from about 12 kilometers northwest of his outpost, in a valley he'd surveyed just last week. There shouldn't be anything out there except ice and rock. G1 ran a diagnostic on the scanner. Maybe the cold had messed with the sensors again, but everything checked out fine. The reading was real. He looked out through the reinforced window of his outpost. The blizzard that had been building all day was now in full force. Snow whipped horizontally across his view, and he could barely see the lights from his nearest equipment shed 30 meters away. The wind was howling like a living thing, rattling the walls of his shelter. Any sane person would wait until morning to investigate a strange reading. Any sane person would assume it was just equipment malfunction, or maybe debris from one of the old mining operations. But Ji-won had been alone on this ice ball for 8 months. A mystery was the most interesting thing that had happened to him in weeks. He pulled up the weather data on his secondary screen. The storm was going to get worse before it got better. Wind speeds were already hitting dangerous levels, and the temperature had dropped to -40 degrees. Even with his thermal suit, it would be risky to go out there. The energy reading pulsed again on his scanner. It was weaker now, like whatever was generating it was losing power. That decided it. For him. Ji-won grabbed his emergency kit from the storage locker. Heavy thermal suit, backup heating units, emergency beacon, medical supplies, portable shelter, and enough food and water for 2 days. He'd learned the hard way that on Hecate Prime, you always packed like you might not make it back home. He suited up carefully, checking every seal and connection twice. The thermal suit was military grade, designed to keep a human alive in conditions that would kill most other species. The heating elements kicked in as soon as he activated it, warming his core temperature to a comfortable level. The emergency sled was parked in the equipment bay. It was designed for exactly this kind of situation, with tank treads that could handle the worst terrain Hecate Prime could throw at him. He loaded his gear and ran one final systems check. The scanner reading was getting even weaker now. Whatever was out there, it was running out of power fast. If he was going to investigate, it had to be now. Ji-won fired up the sled's engine and opened the bay doors. The storm hit him immediately, even through the sled's protective cabin. Snow and ice pelted the windscreen, and the vehicle rocked in the fierce wind. He engaged the navigation system and input the coordinates, 12 kilometers through a blizzard that was trying its best to kill him. Just another Tuesday night on Hecate Prime. As he drove into the storm, following the fading energy signature, Ji-won had no idea he was about to make first contact with an alien species. The emergency sled's headlights cut through the swirling snow like knives through white cloth. Ji-won squinted at his navigation display, fighting to keep the vehicle steady against the howling wind. The energy reading was getting stronger now, which meant he was close. Then he saw it. At first it looked like just another snowdrift in the endless white landscape. But as he got closer, Ji-won could make out the distinctive shape of metal beneath the accumulated ice. It was some kind of vehicle, but unlike anything he'd ever seen. The design was too smooth, too organic-looking to be human technology. He parked the sled and grabbed his emergency kit. The moment he stepped outside, the storm tried to knock him flat. Even with his thermal suit, he could feel the brutal cold. Trying to find any weakness in his protection, he activated his helmet's spotlight and fought his way through the knee-deep snow toward the crashed object. Up close, it was definitely not human. The hull had a crystalline quality that seemed to shift colors even in his white light. Parts of it were cracked and broken from the impact, and he could see a faint glow coming from inside. Ji-won found what looked like a viewport and brushed away the snow. His breath caught in his throat. There was someone inside. Someone definitely not human. The being was small, maybe the size of a teenage girl with pale skin that had an almost transparent quality. Strange markings covered her face and arms, glowing with a soft blue light that was getting dimmer even as he watched. Her eyes were closed and she wasn't moving. She was dying. He could tell that much without being a doctor. Ji-won looked for some kind of door or hatch. The alien craft was damaged, but he managed to find a section that had been cracked open by the impact. He pried it wider with his multi-tool, fighting against metal that was so cold it burned even through his insulated gloves. The moment he opened the hull, he could feel how freezing it was inside. The air that escaped formed instant crystals in the storm. Whatever heating system this craft had once had was completely dead. The alien girl was curled up in what looked like a pilot's seat, shivering so violently her whole body was shaking. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. Frost was forming along those strange, glowing markings on her skin. Ji-won didn't hesitate. He'd seen hypothermia before, and this was severe. Species didn't matter when someone was freezing to death. He quickly unzipped his thermal jacket and wrapped it around her small frame. The jacket was designed to regulate human body temperature, but hopefully it would help her too. She was so cold that touching her through his gloves felt like grabbing ice. Carefully, he lifted her out of the wreckage. She was lighter than he'd expected, almost fragile in his arms. Her head fell against his shoulder, and he could feel how her whole body was trembling. The storm was getting worse. He had to get her back to his outpost fast, or they'd both die out here. Fighting against the wind, Ji-won carried her to his sled. He laid her down in the passenger section and cranked up the vehicle's heater to maximum. Then he grabbed every emergency blanket from his kit and wrapped them around her. The drive back was a nightmare. The storm had picked up even more, and visibility was almost zero. But Ji-won pushed the sled as hard as he dared, knowing that every minute counted. The alien girl hadn't opened her eyes once, and those strange markings on her skin were barely glowing now. As his outpost finally came into view through the blizzard, Ji-won realized he was about to become the first human to make contact with an alien species, and she was dying in his arms. Ji-won burst through the airlock of his outpost, carrying the alien girl in his arms. The sudden warmth hit them both like a wall after the brutal cold outside. His shelter's heating system had been running all day, keeping the interior at a comfortable 22 degrees. For him, it felt like coming home. For her, it might be the difference between life and death. He laid her gently on his couch, the only soft surface big enough in his small living area. She was still shivering violently, her whole body racked with tremors that seemed to come from deep inside. Those strange glowing markings on her skin were barely visible now, just faint traces of blue light that flickered like dying stars. First things first, he needed to get her core temperature up, but he had to be careful. Warming someone with severe hypothermia too quickly could actually kill them. Ji-won had learned that during his emergency medical training before coming to HFY Prime. He grabbed every blanket he owned from his storage closet. Thermal blankets, regular wool blankets, even his spare sleeping bag. Layer by layer, he wrapped them around her small frame, making sure not to restrict her breathing, but creating a cocoon of warmth. Her breathing was still too shallow and fast. That wasn't good. Ji-won pulled out his medical scanner, a basic device that could read vital signs for humans. He wasn't sure if it would work on alien physiology, but it was worth trying. The scanner beeped and showed readings, though they were probably meaningless for her species. What he could see with his own eyes was more useful. Her skin temperature was slowly rising, but she was still dangerously cold. The frost that had been forming along her markings was starting to melt, which seemed like a good sign. He noticed she had what looked like cuts and bruises from the crash. There was a gash on her forehead that had bled a little, though her blood was a strange silver blue, color that seemed to shimmer. Her left arm was positioned awkwardly, possibly injured in the impact. Working carefully, Ji-won cleaned the cut on her forehead with antiseptic from his medical kit. Her skin felt different than human skin, smoother and with that crystalline quality he'd noticed before. When he touched the wound, she made a small sound, the first sign that she might be regaining consciousness. The arm was trickier. He couldn't tell if it was broken or just badly bruised without proper equipment. He made a simple sling from bandages and positioned it to support the injury without causing more damage. After an hour of careful treatment, her shivering finally began to slow down. The violent tremors became gentler, and her breathing started to deepen. Most importantly, those bioluminescent markings on her skin began to glow brighter. The blue light pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat made of light. Ji-won sat back in his chair, exhausted from the rescue and the careful medical work. He'd done everything he could think of with his limited supplies. Now it was up to her body to recover. He made himself a cup of coffee and settled in to watch over her. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside his small outpost, warmth was slowly bringing an alien back to life. "Easy there," Ji-won said softly, gently placing his hand on her shoulder to help her settle back down. "You're safe now, but you need to rest." The alien girl looked at him with those shifting, colorful eyes, clearly not understanding his words but seeming to grasp his tone. She said something in response, her voice melodic and unlike any human language he'd ever heard. The sounds seemed to flow together like music, with subtle changes in pitch that probably carried meaning. Ji-won pointed to himself. "Ji-won," he said clearly. Then he pointed to her with a questioning look. She seemed to understand immediately. She placed her hand on her chest, and those bioluminescent markings flickered brighter for a moment. "Lyra," she said, though the way she pronounced it had an almost singing quality that his human vocal cords could never replicate. It was a start. Over the next few hours, they developed a basic system of communication, pointing, gestures, simple drawings on his tablet computer. When Ji-won showed her pictures of food, she indicated which ones looked safe for her to eat. When he mimed drinking water, she nodded eagerly. But the real breakthrough came when he remembered the universal translator device in his emergency kit. It was a basic model, designed mainly for established trade languages, but it had learning capabilities. As they spoke to each other, it began picking up patterns in her language. The first clear translation was when Lyra pointed outside at the storm and said something that came through the device as "death-cold place." Then she looked at him with obvious confusion and asked what translated as "How do you live here?" Ji-won laughed, the first time he'd laughed in months. "This is my job," he explained, speaking slowly so the translator could work. "I mine minerals here. The company pays me well because most people can't handle the cold." Lyra's eyes widened as the translation reached her. She said something that came through as, "You choose to live on Death World?" "It's not that bad once you get used to it," Ji-won said, though even as he said it, he realized how crazy it must sound to someone who'd nearly died from the cold in just a few hours. Through careful conversation, Lyra explained what she was doing on Hecate Prime. She was a scout for something the translator called the Star Union, mapping worlds that were too dangerous for normal galactic civilization. Her job was to catalogue death worlds and mark them as uninhabitable. "But you live here," she kept saying as if she couldn't quite believe it. "Your people build homes on death worlds. How is this possible?" Ji-won found himself trying to explain human adaptability. How his species had evolved on a world that was considered harsh by galactic standards. How they'd learned to survive in environments that would kill most other beings. How they actually sought out challenging places like Hecate Prime because the rewards were worth the risks. Lyra listened with growing amazement. Through the translator, she told him that most species in the galaxy couldn't survive outside of very specific environmental conditions. Temperature, atmosphere, gravity, everything had to be just right, or they would die quickly. "My people come from warm worlds," she explained. "We cannot live in cold, but you—" She gestured at him, then at the walls of his outpost, then toward the raging storm outside. "You make warm place in the middle of death cold. You save me when I am dying. This is not possible by our understanding." Ji-won realized he was looking at first contact from a completely new perspective. Humans weren't just another species to the galaxy. They were apparently the crazy ones who could live anywhere and make it work. The storm raged for 3 more days, giving Lyra plenty of time to watch how Ji-won lived on what she kept calling a death world. What amazed her most wasn't just that he survived here, but how casually he did it. On the second morning, she watched him get ready for his daily equipment check. He pulled on his thermal suit like it was just regular clothes, checked the seals with practiced ease, and stepped out into temperatures that would have killed her in minutes. Through the reinforced window, she could see him walking around in the blizzard, like it was nothing more than a light rain. When he came back inside 20 minutes later, he was humming. "The mining drone in Sector 7 is acting up again," he told her while pulling off his gear. "Probably ice in the joints. I'll have to go fix it tomorrow if the storm lets up." Lyra stared at him through the translator. "You go outside every day in the death cold?" "Well, yeah," Ji-won said, hanging up his thermal suit. "The equipment needs maintenance. Can't let it break down or the whole operation stops working." To Lyra, this was like watching someone casually stroll through poison gas. Her people had to wear full environmental suits just to visit planets that were slightly cooler than their homeworld. But Ji-won talked about going outside in lethal cold the same way someone might mention taking out the trash. What puzzled her even more was his attitude toward her. In galactic society, first contact with a new species was a huge diplomatic event. There were protocols, ceremonies, careful negotiations between governments. But G1 had simply pulled her out of a crashed ship and saved her life without thinking twice about it. "Why did you help me?" she asked him on the third day, as they shared what he called coffee, and she called warm, bitter water. G1 looked, surprised by the question. "You were dying. What else was I supposed to do?" "Most species would be afraid," Lyra said. "Unknown alien, strange appearance could be dangerous. Your leaders did not tell you to help strangers from space." "My leaders don't even know you exist," G1 laughed. "And yeah, you look different, but you were obviously in trouble. Scared, hurt, freezing to death. Didn't really matter what species you were." This concept seemed to fascinate Lyra. Through their conversations, she revealed that her people, the Velthari, were part of a large galactic civilization. Most species were cautious about contact with others, especially unknown ones. There were rules, procedures, safety protocols. "Your kind is not in our star maps," she told him. "We know your world exists, but we marked it as primitive death world. No intelligent life capable of space travel." "Well, that's embarrassing," Jiwon said with a grin. "We've been traveling to other worlds for decades now. Not very far yet, but we're working on it." Lyra was quiet for a long moment. "Our scientists said any species living on Death World like this would be savage, violent, unable to build civilization because too busy fighting to survive." She gestured around his outpost with its books, his music player, the photos of Earth he'd shown her, the comfortable furniture he'd made from salvaged materials. "But you read stories for pleasure. You play music. You make your living space beautiful, even though no one else will see it. You risk your life to save stranger from different world." She paused. "Our scientists were very wrong. G1 had never thought of himself as particularly special. He was just a guy doing a job on a cold planet." But seeing himself through Lyra's eyes, he began to understand something important. Humans weren't just another species in the galaxy. They were apparently the tough ones, the ones who could thrive where others couldn't even survive. And maybe, just maybe, that made them pretty remarkable after all. On the fourth morning, Jiwon woke up to something he hadn't heard in days. Silence. The constant howling of wind had stopped. When he looked out the window, sunlight was actually breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. "The storm's over," he announced to Lyra, who was sitting at his small table, carefully examining one of his geology books with fascination. She looked up with those color-shifting eyes. "Over? How do you know?" "Listen," Jiwon said, opening the window a crack. "No wind. And look, you can actually see the horizon now." Lyra joined him at the window, and her bioluminescent markings brightened with what he'd learned was excitement. "My beacon," she said suddenly. "It might work now. The storm was blocking the signal." She retrieved a small crystalline device from her salvaged belongings. As soon as she activated it, it began pulsing with soft light. Within seconds, it was glowing steadily. "My people will know where I am now," she said, though her voice carried a strange mix of relief and something else. "They will come for me." G1 felt an unexpected pang at those words. After 4 days of isolation broken only by alien company, he'd grown used to having someone to talk to, someone who found his stories interesting instead of just the lonely rambling of a man who'd been alone too long. "How long until they get here?" he asked. Lyra consulted another device. "2 of your days, maybe 3. My ship is not far, but they will be careful approaching a death world." They spent the remaining time sharing their worlds with each other. Lyra told him about the galaxy beyond Earth's solar system. Hundreds of intelligent species, vast cities that floated in space, planets that had been completely transformed to support life, trade routes that spanned dozens of star systems, and a loose confederation of worlds that maintained peace through careful diplomacy. "Your people have no idea how big the galaxy really is," she said. "So many wonders out there." In return, Jiwon shared stories of human exploration, how his species had started by crossing oceans on wooden ships, then learned to fly, then reached for the stars. He told her about the first human colonies on Mars, the mining stations in the asteroid belt, the generation ships that were slowly making their way to nearby star systems. "We're not as advanced as your people yet," he said. "But we keep pushing into places others say are impossible. It's kind of what we do." Lyra was particularly amazed by stories of human survival. The Antarctic research stations, the deep-sea colonies, the volcanic mining operations. Each tale made her markings glow brighter with excitement. "Your species seeks out the dangerous places," she said. "Most beings in the galaxy avoid such risks. We build safe worlds, comfortable worlds." "Maybe that's the difference," Ji-won suggested. "We grew up on a dangerous world, so dangerous doesn't scare us as much as it should." They talked about their families, their dreams, their fears. Lyra spoke of her home world's crystal cities and warm desert winds. Ji-won described Earth's blue oceans and green forests. Despite coming from worlds that couldn't be more different, they found common ground in curiosity about the universe and care for others. On the second evening, as they watched the aurora dance across Hecate Prime's sky, Lyra said something that surprised him. "I will miss this place, and I will miss talking with you." "Me too," Ji-won admitted. "It's been nice having someone to share stories with." Neither of them mentioned the obvious, that when her people arrived, everything would change. This simple friendship between a human and an alien, born from a storm and nurtured by shared warmth, would become something much bigger than either of them had ever imagined. The rescue ship appeared on the third day like a silver star descending from the clear sky. Ji-won had never seen anything like it. The vessel moved without making any sound, its hull reflecting the sunlight in patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. It was beautiful in a way that human technology had never quite achieved. Lyra stood beside him at the window, her markings pulsing with rapid flashes of light. "They are here," she said, but her voice carried uncertainty rather than joy. The ship landed gracefully about 100 meters from his outpost, barely disturbing the snow beneath it. A section of the hull simply dissolved away, revealing an opening where 3 figures emerged. They looked similar to Lyra but taller, wearing what appeared to be environmental suits designed for the cold. "I should go meet them," Lyra said, but she didn't move toward the door. "What's wrong?" Ji-won asked. "Aren't you happy to see your people?" "Yes, but—" she hesitated. "They will want to take me away immediately. Standard protocol for contact with unknown species. Quarantine, debriefing, analysis." The 3 figures were approaching his outpost now, moving carefully across the snow. Ji-won could see them scanning the area with handheld devices. "Then let's go meet them together," he said. Lyra's eyes widened. "Together? But they will be afraid of you. Humans are not in our databases as space-capable. They think your species is primitive." "Well," Ji-won said, pulling on his thermal jacket, "maybe it's time to update their databases." When they stepped outside, the 3 Velthari stopped dead in their tracks. The leader, a tall female with more elaborate markings than Lyra, spoke, rapidly in their musical language. Even without the translator, Ji-won could hear the alarm in her voice. "Commander Zephyr," Lyra replied in their language, then switched to the common tongue so Ji-won could understand. "This is Ji-won. He saved my life." Commander Zephyr's markings flashed in what Ji-won was learning meant extreme surprise. She spoke rapidly to Lyra, who responded with equally quick explanations. The conversation went on for several minutes, with the commander's markings growing brighter and more agitated. Finally, Lyra turned to Ji-won. She wants to know how a primitive death welder could have the technology to save someone with hypothermia. "Tell her I used blankets and turned up the heat," Ji-won said dryly. When this was translated, all 3 aliens stared at him with those color-shifting eyes. Commander Zephyr approached cautiously and spoke through Lyra's translator. She asks, "How you knew to treat hypothermia without medical scanners or thermal regulation chambers?" Lyra translated. "Basic first aid," Ji-won replied. "We learn it in school, gradual warming, keep the patient comfortable, monitor breathing." More rapid conversation between the aliens. Then Commander Zephyr asked something that made Lyra's markings flash brightly. "She wants to know if you would be willing to come aboard our ship," Lyra said. "As my honored guest, she says the Galactic Council needs to hear about this directly." Ji-won looked at the silver ship, then at Lyra's hopeful expression. "Do you want me to come with you?" My report alone will not be enough, Lyra said. They need to see for themselves what humans are capable of, that you are not primitive survivors, but... She paused, searching for words. But something the galaxy has never encountered before. An hour later, G1 found himself aboard an alien starship, looking down at Hecate Prime through a transparent wall that shouldn't have been able to exist. The planet looked beautiful from space, its ice storms visible as swirling white patterns. Across the surface, Commander Zephyr was speaking into a communication device, her report clearly causing quite a stir on the other end. G1 caught enough through the translator to understand that she was describing humans as impossible survivalists and compassionate beyond galactic norms. Lyra sat beside him, watching his reaction to his first spaceflight. "Are you frightened?" she asked. G1 grinned. "Terrified," he admitted. "But it's the good kind of terrified, the kind that means you're about to see something amazing." Outside the ship, the stars awaited, and with them, humanity's first real introduction to the galaxy. The Galactic Council chamber was unlike anything G1 had ever imagined. Representatives from dozens of species sat in curved tiers that spiraled up toward a crystalline dome showing the stars beyond. Some looked almost human, others were so alien he couldn't even figure out which end was their head. The air hummed with translation devices, working in hundreds of languages simultaneously. G1 sat in what they called the witness section, wearing clothes that Lyra's people had provided since his mining gear wasn't exactly diplomatic attire. He felt completely out of place among beings who had been traveling between stars since before humans discovered fire. Lyra stood at the center of the chamber, her bioluminescent markings glowing steady and bright as she addressed the council. Her voice carried clearly through the vast space, translated instantly for every species present. "Honored representatives," she began, "I come before you to correct a grave error in our galactic records. The species known as humans, inhabitants of the world designated Earth, are not the primitive survivors we believed them to be." A ripple of interest went through the chamber. Several representatives leaned forward in their seats. Lyra continued, "3 weeks ago, my scout ship crashed on the death world Hecate Prime during a severe storm. The temperature was 60 degrees below the survival threshold of my species. My ship's life support had failed. I was dying." She gestured toward G1. "This human mining engineer G1 Park detected my ship's distress signal. Despite a blizzard that would kill most galactic species in minutes, he traveled 12 kilometers through the storm to find me. He risked his own life to save a complete stranger from an unknown species." The chamber erupted in surprised sounds, chittering and humming and other noises that G1's translator couldn't quite handle. One representative, a tall being covered in what looked like blue fur, spoke up. "You claim this human survived conditions that would be lethal to most of us. How is this possible?" "That is what I thought as well," Lyra replied. "But humans evolved on what we classify as a death world. What is lethal cold to us is merely uncomfortable to them. They have built entire civilizations in environments that would kill us." She activated a holographic display showing images from Earth that G1 had shared with her. Antarctic research stations, deep-sea mining platforms, desert settlements, mountain cities. The council watched in stunned silence. "But more remarkable than their physical resilience," Lyra continued, "is their compassion. G1 did not hesitate to help me despite the risk. He shared his warmth, his food, his shelter. He asked for nothing in return. This is not an isolated case. Such behavior appears to be typical of their species." Commander Zephyr, who had been silent until now, stood to address the council. "I have reviewed our first contact protocols with this human. He shows no fear of us, no hostility, only curiosity and friendship. Our xenosociologists believe this indicates a species with extraordinary empathy and adaptability." The blue-furred representative spoke again. "If what you say is true, these humans could survive on worlds we have deemed uninhabitable. They could establish colonies where no other species can live." "More than that," Lyra said, her markings pulsing brighter with excitement. "They could help other species survive in hostile environments. Their knowledge of survival techniques, their adaptability, their willingness to help others, these are gifts the galaxy has never seen before." An elder representative from a species that looked like living crystal stood slowly. "You propose we invite these humans to join galactic society?" "I propose more than that," Lyra replied. "I propose we learn from them. For too long, we have avoided dangerous worlds, left them empty and unused. Humans could help us reclaim those worlds, expand our civilization into places we never thought possible." The debate that followed lasted hours. Some representatives worried about bringing in such an unknown species. Others were excited by the possibilities. But Lyra's testimony, backed by Commander Zephyr's report and G1's quiet presence, was compelling. Finally, the Elder Crystal being called for silence. "We will establish a formal first contact mission with Earth, but first we extend our gratitude to Scout Lyra and Engineer G1 for showing us that sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from distant stars but from simple acts of kindness." As the council session ended, Lyra found G1 in the corridor outside the chamber. "Well?" she asked. "How does it feel to be humanity's first ambassador to the galaxy?" G1 shook his head, still overwhelmed. "All I did was help someone who needed it. I never expected it to lead to this." "That is exactly why it did," Lyra replied, her markings glowing warmly. "You helped because it was right, not because you expected anything in return. The galaxy needs more beings like that." Looking out through the station's massive windows at the thousands of ships from hundreds of worlds, G1 realized that everything had changed. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and it had all started with a simple choice to step out into a storm to help a stranger. Around midnight, her eyes fluttered open for the first time. They were unlike anything he'd ever seen, large and opalescent, shifting between colors like oil on water. When she saw him sitting nearby, she didn't seem afraid. Instead, she looked confused, like she was trying to figure out where she was and what had happened. G1 raised his hand slowly, palm open, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. She watched him carefully, those strange, beautiful eyes taking in everything about him and his shelter. Then, incredibly, she tried to sit up,